Hello, welcome back. I am Joe Auger. Been promising this um, little video for a while. I apologize for, the lateness of the hour. But, sometimes life gets in the way of things. So, what I'm doing here is what I did something similar a few months back with the George Harrison All Things Must Pass remaster. I basically just did an analyzation of the music and the sound and the audio and the new mixes and all that kind of stuff. And someone had mentioned up on a YouTube comment that I should do the same for the Giles Martin remixes of Beatles stuff. So, he started with Sgt. Pepper. He's gone on to do White Album. He's gone on to do Abbey Road and Let It Be. Rumors have it that potentially they are looking to go backwards and do potentially Rubber Soul and Revolver, which would be interesting. See what they can do with the technology or not. But anyway, so what I'm doing here though for this one is I'm gonna lay out the Sgt. Pepper remix project that was put out back in 2016, I believe it was, what I'm doing is I'm not going through the box. It's not an unboxing. I'm not really talking about any of the extras that were on it, like the extra takes and the bits and pieces and the funny mixes and the other sort of stuff that kind of goes with it. Basically, what I'm doing is analyzing the album on its own, with a couple of caveats, a couple of little changes, and just a general kind of comparison of the original stereo / mono releases, and then the remasters that happened back in 2008 or 9 or whatever it was at this point, and then now this remix, which is a stereo remix in general. However, to get a sense of what they were trying to do, they were looking at. All right, let me back up a little bit. So back in '67, mono, or the mono versus stereo question was just about kind of heating up a little bit more. But in '67, mono was still basically the format that most people used and that most people were felt was more important. The mono mix of Sgt. Pepper. The Beatles were in the room as it was being mixed. The stereo version of Pepper, they were not, and it was kind of basically considered, just something they had to do for the marketplace. And whatever was done with the stereo wasn't really carefully planned out per se. Which, ironically, though, when mono fell out of favor, even just a year later, the Sgt. Pepper stereo mix is what has been basically played from 1969 forward, and what most people have listened to most of their lives, what newer generations have discovered, up until 2009 with those re-releases where the mono version was made available again in the Beatles mono box. And it's worth it to make comparisons of those three things: the mono version, the stereo version, and then the new remix version. Because again, the Beatles and George Martin considered the mono version to be the definitive version of Sgt. Pepper. Seems odd. Seems kind of like, really? Considering it's such an interest, the kind of project it was it's like perfect for a 2-channel musical experience, right? But again, back in '67, that was not the case. So, going forward, what I'm going to be doing is basically going through each song and just doing general ideas about what's different about the mono, the original stereo, and now this new remix. Now, as I did with the All Things Must Pass record, I listened to high-res digital sources for the new mix, as well as the remastered 2008/9 mix, master, I should say, because I think that those masters are probably, as far as the digital realm goes, if you're looking at the original versions of the albums, are as good as anything you're going to find. There are other websites and YouTube channels that kind of delve into more of the actual, of like original pressings, what pressing is better, the German version versus a UK version from 1982, and all. I don't get that granular. So I leave that to the folks that have that kind of time, that kind of money, and that kind of obsession to get into those things. Because yeah, there probably are better vinyl pressings than ones that I have. Vinyl pressings that I have, I do have originals of the mono version. I have 70s Apple pressings of Sgt. Pepper, which I wouldn't even bother to play because those are my childhood records that I played to death, and the sound of those at this point are fairly awful. So, and other than that, the newer represses, the stereo represses from 2009. Again, I don't listen to those because those are taken from digital sources, which kind of throws things off a little bit as far as I'm concerned, and I think most people would agree with me on that. However, I do have the mono remaster from the 2009 era, which is a really good, actually, pressing. Those pressings in general are very good indeed. Maybe not the best, but pretty damn good. But I'm limiting myself a little bit. This is more about just real simple, generalized differences between the three: mono, original stereo, new remix. And I listen to them on the same speakers and headphones that I use with All Things Must Pass. So, and the car being somewhat of a final arbiter in a lot of these things. Again, I drive a lot, so I think with anybody else, that's sort of my day-to-day kind of listening experience. And when I'm able to sit and think and listen and be a little more granular with my listening, I can use my better speakers. So, the things that are different that I did, and the things that, in general, I had a couple of issues with the remix project. Not a lot of this one, the Sgt. Pepper. As far as I'm concerned, in general, I think it's the definitive listening experience. If you're looking to get a sense of how well that record was recorded, and the fact that, in general, because the tape archives at EMI were so well kept, basically, apart from a couple of early tapes from the 62, 63 era, they have every single thing that was ever put to tape by the Beatles, and that includes generational tapes. So during the Sgt. Pepper time, they were doing, recording the 4-track, bouncing to another 4-track, filling those up, bouncing back to another 4-track. So there was a lot of generations of tape overdubbing that were done. Now, every single one of those generations exists in this archive. What they did is they were able to find those generations, digitize every single one of those generations, put them into Pro Tools environment, sync them all up, and in essence clarify and separate those instruments that wouldn't have been able to be done, easily with slightly more primitive technology. Today's digital technology can transfer that stuff into high res, and you can get phenomenal sound. And that's what they did. That was the original intent, and that was the original idea. And right there, that idea was what separates this from a lot of these remix projects. So, in looking at some of my notes about it, it's because there's a lot of notes. Of course, I will be referring to a little piece of paper here. There's a reason. So, there's a reason why that record won Best Engineered Record back in whatever it was, '68 in the Grammys. When you listen to this record in the new remix form, especially in the high-res version, the clarity of the instruments and the voices in general is astounding. It's as three-dimensional as you're going to get. And and obviously Sergeant Pepper was the most three-dimensional that they got. I mean, on many many levels, especially with the recording techniques. Now, I've always said privately, and I think it's been echoed by others, is that is Sergeant Pepper their best written album? Like, does it have the best songs of their entire catalog? Probably not. I mean, apart from a few, obviously something like Day in the Life is exceptional. There's the Strawberry Fields, Penny Lane. I mean, far be it from me. That's you're putting apples and oranges in the same frame and trying to like describe the two or which one is better, and it's like however, when you're talking about the Beatles catalog, you have to look at those the high watermarks that they set for themselves. Are the songs better than Revolver? No, not by any stretch, because I think that Revolver was their peak moment. But that's my opinion, of course. However, as a production piece, as a work of art, Sergeant Pepper is the pinnacle at that point. So with that said, there's a lot of debate about the running order of the record. Now we're talking about like the original running order of the record. Famously, Strawberry Fields and Penny Lane were recorded first, or early, and then was released as a single in February before the record came out. George Martin has famously also said he felt that in hindsight that was potentially a mistake, that those two songs should have been on the record. So I took that to heart, and in general, whenever I listen to Sgt. Pepper, I need to listen to those two songs as well. It's of the same era. It's of the same project, So in my mind, thinking of like, okay, well, how would those two songs fit in what the album ended up being? Like, what would be the potential track order or something like that? So, it's one of those things you can do in the digital age now. You can make your own sort of mixtapes and stuff, and I have a lot of fun doing that kind of thing. The alternate versions or the alternate universe versions of what the album might have been. With that in mind, one song, and this is where I think the project failed, and I'm not sure why they didn't add it, but during the sessions, George Harrison brought in a Northern Song as one of his two contributions to the record. They worked on it, and somehow it was judged as being superfluous and not up to snuff, and blah, blah, blah. Again, these are all my opinions, but I don't think... this goes towards George Harrison's, I think, eventual kind of getting pissed off about how he was treated. A Northern Song is no worse or better than Lovely Rita, in my mind. Does Lovely Rita have more of a song structure that's sort of very obvious? Yes. Is it anything earth-shattering? Not in any way, shape, or form. Northern Song, I don't know. There's a goofy charm about it that I think would have fit nicely onto the record, and I made that happen because I could. So, for me, what you're gonna hear now, the running order that I've created is what I'm going to actually be remarking on, because again, those three songs, Strawberry Fields, Penny Lane, and A Northern Song, are part of this project. That's the whole project writ large, right? Any of the other stuff, I mean, there really wasn't anything else during that time that was released until much later. But that was literally like that they worked on after Pepper had been done. So I created my own track list, and you'll see it revealed as I talk about the record. So you're aware, this is my sort of mix of Sgt. Pepper as I see it, including A Northern Song, Strawberry Fields, and Penny Lane, in some sort of album running order. In general, as I was remarking about mono, my general thoughts about the remastered mix, which is the mix from 2008, 9/9. is that there's a lot of things that are very unbalanced in the stereo field. Starting with, of course, the theme song to Sgt. Pepper, which is Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. So, remarking on the remastered mix, which is the original stereo mix, as remastered in late 2000, in 2008, 2009. The first thing that I kind of remarked, or that I heard in my head, was that how unbalanced the stereo field is, especially when you're listening on headphones. And, and it's just not something I thought about. It's not something that popped out at me all these years. Paul's vocal is onto the right side of the mix. And it's really soft in comparison with everything else going on. The chorus vocals, the horns, like it feels it just feels just softer, like not even distant. Like it's not like it's an effect. It just sounds like just not loud enough, So my note here says, what is and has always been a thing is that it is a way to isolate the instruments to study them. Oh, okay. So, the thing that I like about, old-fashioned stereo mixes is that, like, they did have things like a real kind of hard-panned vocal here or a hard-panned hi-hat there or something like that. And it is a way to be able to study all those sort of the separate elements of things. And I still like that aspect of things. From that original stereo mix. However, in this situation, again, it just dawned on me. It just felt like, why isn't McCartney's vocal just forward more? I'm not sure why. It just seems odd to me. So then, then listening to the mono version of this, which is the original mono from '67, and I write as intended. So this again would have been done with the Beatles in the room, George Martin and Jeff Emmerich doing the mixing and engineering. And in general, the balance is perfect. It's like the horns are dry, so there's there's none of that. Especially when the horns come in, you don't hear that kind of slap back reverb or room sound going on. It's very dry, and in general, the whole thing is very dry. And some of the effects are a little different too, and this is the thing that goes between the Sgt. Pepper stereo mix and the mono mix, is that there are differences in the effects that happen and some of the effects that are applied to different things, vocals, instruments, or whatever. And those are the things we're talking about now. So in general, the first song is very much drier than the stereo version. The audience scream does not come into in the pause between. In between Sgt. Pepper with a little help from my friends, it's slightly like it feels like the timing of it is a little off on the mono again, and it's hard to say whether that because we're so used to the stereo version of it, it's like still jarring to hear that mono version. We're talking to 3/4 of my life I've listened mostly to that stereo version. The mono version is what it is, but I have not listened to it as much, to be honest. So, and it's a jarring kind of thing when you're listening to it. And it's not just the Beatles, but many of the re-released versions of records, like Pink Floyd's first record, same things. We've been listening to the stereo all these years. The mono version is very different. And again, whether they felt that the mono was definitive or not, I'm not really sure. I've never really heard whether that's the case with the first Pink Floyd record. But anyway, very similar thing. I think a lot of it's just kind of retraining your brain to think about how things go. Now, okay, so now on to the remix. And again, I was listening to this in high-res digital files. So one of the conceits that Giles Martin had was that because the mono was deemed the more definitive by the Beatles and George Martin, yet the stereo was the one that was the most common, he wanted to try and find some sort of middle ground between the two. So, I mean, what do you do? How do you do that? So, in lieu of just kind of aping what the stereo was doing, he rearranged a few things. And so now he's able to spread things out a little more with a little more equanimity, by doing that transfer of the generational submixed tapes, you can really hear what I have here. Is just like you can really hear everything in its own space, better balanced in the stereo field. The stereo field is essentially as the original mix, but now the vocal is dead center and balanced correctly as the mono. So what it does is it fixes that issue for me, which is that Paul's vocal way over here was too soft. Now it's right dead center, more like the mono, more in front, but you still are getting a stereo spread of the instruments in general, and you're getting that room sound. So what Giles did is, I mean, he basically kind of did I don't want to say a mashup, but a melding of the mono and the stereo aesthetic, I guess is one way of putting it. So, okay, and then moving on to With a Little Help from My Friends. The a remaster, the original mix. It's interesting how going from Sergeant Pepper, which again sounded unbalanced to me, how this song just sounds so much better balanced, and the remaster's not overbearing. Like, and in general, the remastering in the 2009 era, they didn't go crazy with over accentuating the bottom end and the drums and the bass and stuff like that. They kept it. They pulled it out a little bit, enough to be just pulling the clarity out. And again, we're talking about the remasters now, not the remix. So that way, yeah, is it a little more bottom kind of there? Yes, it is. But they didn't just overdo it, which is nice. So basically it is another for me one of the highlights of just how sonically good this record is. It's kind of interesting. It says better stereo glue than the Sgt. Pepper theme. Yeah, so that's kind of what it is. Like, so whatever they did to mix With a Little Help from My Friends. Like, in my mind, I would have thought this, like, something, this mix sounds better than that mix. Let's go back and remix Sgt. Pepper to be a little better. But that potentially, again, not knowing what order they did these things in, as far as I could find that out, again, not being that granular. But that mix, so the mix of With a Little Help from My Friend, the original stereo mix, is pretty, I mean, as good as it gets on that record. It's one of the highlights as far as I'm concerned, especially sonically. Now, on the mono, the original 67 mono, there seems to be more phasing on Ringo's voice, and the back vocals as well. The same thing, the sonics of that song were just well captured, and let's see, it says, same here with sonic sounding Ringo, less reverb. So a little bit, same thing, a little bit drier sound, and it says a slight volume reaction on Ringo's last note. Yeah. Okay. It says trying to cover up any shortcomings that enhance the track emotionally. I found that the dryness of Ringo's voice in the mono version, which was ever so slightly more upfront, was captured more of the vulnerability of the fact that he's not the best singer in the world, and he's just probably doing the best vocal he ever did for the Beatles. But it's dry. So whereas on the stereo version, there's a lot more reverb, a little more, less phasing, more reverb. It covers up maybe a multitude of sins, kind of thing, and one has to wonder if that's what's happening, especially on the last high note that he is, probably just at the top of his range. He pretty much nails it, but if you listen close, it's he's I think struggling with it a little bit, but he nails it eventually. So, now we're on to the remix of With a Little Help. What's interesting is this is where Giles, from the original mono, he mimics the stereo version, and the audience screams in the pause between the two, which makes the most sense. Like, the mind picture is that, he's walked onto the stage from the side of the ring, and you hear the girl screaming, right? So, whereas on the mono, you don't quite get that picture, It says, my notes here, it says, hearing everything breathing in its own space. And this, I think, was what I just was like, when I was first listening to the new remix, is what drew me in. I think, that the sonics that were captured on this song especially, everything is breathing so well, but yet it's all together, but everything has its own space. And really, it's a really revelatory experience. At least it was for me. And I have here, especially the drums, particularly. There's a lot of things you don't hear again on the original mixes because there wasn't. It just like the nuances of things that they did were not. I just weren't in the forefront of one's consciousness, right? In general, the drums on on the whole remix record are revelatory. I mean, there's back and forth about Ringo. Is he a good drummer? Is he not a good drummer? I mean, for the love of God, can we just retire that stupidity? Ringo's drumming is genius. Ringo is a genius. The uniqueness of his work is what it is, and no one ever has ever played like him, and no one ever will. And you hear it on this recording. One of the things that in my mind I never understood or really got in listening to this song is that on the verses of the song, he's hitting the snare much more sort of gently, just like lighter, and just like, keeping the pace, but lighter. And then when the chorus comes in, he's rim cracking that puppy. It's like you don't hear it for some reason. I just never heard it before. Listen back to it again because obviously I can't play it here. I wish I could. Listen to it again. On the verses, he's playing just a light kind of bop on the snare, and then on the chorus, he's hitting the wham. He's hitting that trademark Ringo rim shot, and it's like it was jolted me awake. It was like, wow, I had never heard that before, and it's so subtle, but it's so beautiful and so perfect. So it's stuff like this that, this is why I like these kinds of projects. It pulls stuff out that you just have never really heard before. And it had nothing to do with what Giles did. He didn't have to do anything. But in finding the nuances of the original generational tape, those things are like magnified, or they pull out because they're so clear. In general, the percussion arrangement on the song is just beautiful. I mean, so, and what going through that, talking about his voice again, it says here, my note is that his last note is left full on in all its quavering glory. And it's true. So when you hear it, you're not hearing in the mono version a little phasing to kind of, smooth the little bit of voice quaver where he's possibly going to lose that note or whatever. You hear his last note on this song in all of its non-perfect glory. And it's like, you never loved Ringo more in that moment, because it's like, it's Ringo. He's just being Ringo, and he's hitting that note for all he's worth, and he's going to hit that fucking note, and it's not going to be perfect, but boy, is it heartfelt. And it's just beautiful. It really is. And so, after hearing With a Little Help of My Friends remix, I'm in. I'm totally in, as you can kind of sense. So it's probably, for me, one of the best bits on the record at that point. All right, so now onward to track 3, which is Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. So the original stereo mix remaster. In general, the note here I have is that it's balanced well for the most part. And the bass sound on that is just so, that's that trademark DI Paul McCartney bass sound. That's just, it's so full, but it's not overbearing. Again, it's not taking over the whole track. It's there and it's very prominent, but it's it's just like this beautiful bouncy ball of a sonic that's just like, whenever I hear the Beatles songs that have that bouncy, that really just beautifully rounded bass tone is just, oh God. I'd give my life to be able to create a bass tone like that. And it says, yeah, it says you forgive how forward it is, but again, in the first part of the song, it's as featured as John's vocal is, really. So one of the things that's interesting about the new remix in general, the whole album, is that Giles Martin took the opportunity to clean up a lot of things. If you listen to the original stereo and mono, there's it's a little messy. The final mixes are a little messy. But those are the kinds of things that I love, like a stray voice here, or someone talking over there, or someone drops a drumstick over, whatever it might be. And it's like those are the kinds of things that keep me drawn in year after year after year, and things that pop up. It's like, oh, I never noticed that before. So one of the things on the original stereo mix of Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds there's a couple of things, especially Lennon's vocal. There's a moment where it's after the words incredibly high when he's going from that verse into the bridge section. In the original stereo, you kind of hear him go he does this weird little I don't know, vocalization that's like he's either messing something up or whatever it was, and it says it's been in the stereo mix forever. In the new remix, Giles saw fit to kind of got rid of that little thing. So, I got why he did that. It doesn't overall detract. It's just one of those things that as a kid when you first discover that, and you always expect that sound to be there, and then suddenly it's not there. So it's like, I always have the original mix to go to if I need to hear that little of John Lennon's after that verse. So in general, the original stereo mix is, I think, the superior mix. Now, the mono mix was a tad slower. So in other words, for the stereo mix, they sped it up a bit, and the mono also has a lot more phasing on the vocals. I think what's interesting when you think about, especially the mono versions of this record, is that what this would have sounded like in 1967 on people's car radios, right? And the sounds, especially from Lucy in the Sky, must have been just like, what is this? What is this? These alien sonic things going on in this, on the radio. Especially so, and the thing of it is that it kind of still sounds like that. It's never, especially something like Lucy in the Sky, has never really lost that slightly alien kind of vibe to it. I think it's easy to take it for granted, I think, just because it's so perennial at this point. But if you try to listen to it with sort of remember back when you first heard Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, what a weird fucking song it was, especially the chorus. There's something weird about the chorus, the way the chords run, that acidy Vox organ thing going on. When Paul McCartney comes in with his harmony, the harmony itself is a little dissonant, and it's sort of like it's just not something. It's just it's really. I don't want to say it's not unpleasant to the ear, but it's not necessarily pleasant to the ear either. It's somewhere in between. They got that crack in between of like, is this wrong, or is this about as right as it gets? But that's the song, So that's the arrangement. Now the remix, again, there's just the notes are like so. If you listen to the remix, Ringo's kick drum is there from the very beginning of the song, which I don't hear in the stereo and mono versions. It's like it's there. I don't want to say it's prominent and up front, but it's there right underneath the bass notes. And the Lowry organ, the main riff of the piece, is now spread out in the stereo spread, and it sounds beautiful in that regard. The bass actually is better balanced than the original stereo. So as I mentioned before, as beautiful as that bass sounded, it's very up front. For the remix, it's definitely slightly brought back and a little bit more, just a little bit more under the vocal, but not enough to be like really like, why is the bass so soft? It's still prominent, and it's still basically there as but it's there in less of a lead role with the vocal as it was in the remix, or in the original stereo. Excuse me. The remix now has a little bit more of a supporting role. And for me, I think it in general does feel better for that. And I already talked about how they've cleaned up sort of the vocal things here and there. And let's see, the nuance of the drums, and later the organ, piano, and the guitars, and the tambora. Again, just being able to hear all of the 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 air around each of these instruments. You really can actually you can just kind of hear the experimentation going on in their heads, and when they would put the tambora on that chorus or whatever it was, or that bridge, and you just hear this is like you can hear the gears going on in their heads. To me, it's like let's put a tambora there. It's like, okay, let's try it, and then they put it on, and it's just like, yeah, that's cool, that's perfect. It's like, I don't know. It's just like, it was like the seed of experimentation on this record is really beautiful, and it's just been cleaned up in such a way that you really kind of hear it even better than you could with the original stereo. So on to the next bit, which is getting better. So with the stereo remaster, once again, it's very well balanced. The use of the space in the arrangement, it's so unusual even after 55 years later. And I have here is the tambura as evil, question mark. Let's see, gives it oh, okay. And then, of course, at the very end, at the repeated high note that's happening with the guitar and piano or whatever that is, that keeps it kind of going in a very kind of paranoid, creates a paranoid kind of vibe to it. Like, I never noticed it before, but in general, same thing with this song. Really nice percussion arrangement. There's congas on it. Same thing with I mean, you could always hear the stuff in there, but again, you couldn't hear it as clearly. But getting better, kind of is what it is. The tambora coming in the middle of that is, like, I've always thought of it as the sort of the dark side of the human psyche, right? Things are getting better, so there's that positivity, but then there's lurking under the surface, and especially when they come in with that verse, I used to be cruel to my woman, I beat her and kept her apart from the things that she loved, and there's this evil sort of sounding grinding noise, it's like interesting that they use that sound in a less sort of joyous way, like it would be used like in a regular classical Indian kind of context. They put it in a completely different context, and got to wonder if anybody else from the Indian classical kind of arena would have heard that and gone, that's a very unusual and perhaps inappropriate use of that instrument for that moment in the song. I don't know, just something that I think about. So the mono version, I wrote here, someone cynical waking up to the pleasures of life, admitting horrible misogyny, only to end on that psycho-sounding set of tones, underscored by a lone set of congas. It's true. It's like, if you think about the start until the end of the song, in the middle of the song, he admits to this misogyny. He admits to being not the nicest person in the world. And then at the end of the song kind of ends with that weird kind of ding, that really kind of grating, like, it doesn't end on a good note, really. It ends on sort of like someone just like, something like it's pinging in their head, So, yeah, it's an odd song in its own. And if you think about it, and here we go. I'm going to go into the remix. The remix, same thing. It's a song says, it really benefits exploring the layers of the production, especially with the drums. Again, I'm going to say this a lot for a lot of these. So again, something I didn't hear before. There's two different snare drums on the choruses. There's one dry snare on the 2 and the 3, and then like really wet, snappy snare drum hits on the 3. as an accent. The multi-generational layers from the original stereo, you lose that definition of the two snares going on at once. It's clearly the reason why they put it there as an accent. And now you really hear it. It's like really clear. The bass in general is clear. And I think in general, this is one of those songs that McCartney's bass is just genius on it. I mean, what he's doing in the background is so it's just so fluid. And again, just that beautiful round tone he got out of that Rickenbacker was just insane. So this is one of those songs that really benefited, I think, from the remix. Again, I can't say enough about Ringo's drumming and conga playing for that matter. I mean, he just like there's percussion elements here that are really subtle but so striking at the same time, if that makes sense. And again, things that you really didn't hear in the original mixes. So at least and again, I'm not saying that I mean, put it this way: for me, if I'm going to think writ large in the middle of all of this, I'm going to say, which version of Sgt. Pepper do I listen to most? If I listen to it recently, I listen to the remix. I just do. The sound of it and the execution of it all, I think is pretty damn perfect. A few minor quibbles here or there, it doesn't really bother me that much. Okay, so now we're going to deviate a little bit. This is where I put in my 2 cents, if you will. The one major flaw that I see in this new in this remix project, and whether they were going to put it as part, like I wasn't expecting anything. I wasn't expecting them to redo the entire track listing or whatever. However, they don't mention a Northern Song. They don't even mention it in the notes that it happened. It was like they rewrote history. It's like they whitewashed it out of the whole project. And to me, it's just like, I don't understand that one. I really don't. I mean, we all know it ended up on the Yellow Submarine project as an offshoot, which I think, again, that's kind of giving Harrison short shrift there. I don't think that. I just don't think it was fair. I think that was one of those moments where probably Harrison started to kind of grok what was going on. It's like, listen, this song that I just brought in is no better than that song that McCartney just brought in, but yet McCartney gets on without a problem. You know what I mean? Like in hindsight, with all the history and the things we're learning about all that stuff, I can sense that this is probably one of those moments where Harrison said, "Fuck all y'all." There's nothing wrong with this song. Yeah. Is it a genius song? No. And is it gonna like it was a, but neither is Lovely Rita or Good Morning for that matter. You know what I mean? It's not Lennon and McCartney's finest hours by any stretch. So anyway, that aside. But that they didn't do a remix of it just to have as part of the extras, and that they didn't even put it in the diary of each day of like what they worked on. It's like just whitewashed out of the project. So on that part of it, this project gets an F. Now, I mean, it's a small F. Don't get me wrong, but I was that was the one place where I was really kind of like disappointed. Anyway, so with that said, to keep with the thought process regarding remixes and that, so we know that a Northern Song was remixed back in, I don't remember what the date was, but it would have been when the Yellow Submarine movie was remixed and remastered for DVD. Not the most recent one, but the one before that. And then created a CD of the Yellow Submarine song track, where every song, no matter how short a snippet of it, was remixed for this new album. So, A Northern Song wasn't remixed by Giles Martin, but so of course I don't have. I should have the record with me so that I could. I'll put it in the notes of who remixed that one. Anyway, so A Northern Song was remixed. So I could get, and they did the same thing. They kind of went generationally to the tapes, transferred them digitally, resynced them in Pro Tools, and then remixed from there. So same thing. You're getting a better sound picture in general. Now, the thing that's most striking is when you listen to the drums. Once again, it's the same drum sound that Jeff Emmerich got for all the other drum sounds on the rest of the record. So, the thread is there. It's not some sort of outlier that like makes no sense with the record by any stretch. So, I have always thought that's like, okay, I want to hear what this song would sound like as part of the record. Now, side one has always been bothered me that it was very Macca heavy. You go from Getting Better to straight into Fixing a Hole, and both of them are very similar in that kind of quarter note keyboard thing that he started getting into during that era. To me, it was sort of like, all right, this needs to be broken up right there, right? And also, it would balance the record, with the Harrison tune on one side and the Harrison tune on side two, right? So I put a Northern song between Getting Better and Fixing a Hole, and this is again the remix from that was done for the Yellow Submarine song track. Now, I first did the remastered version from, again, the Yellow Submarine album from 2009. So this would be the original stereo mix. And in general, the song fits perfectly in my estimation. I think, as I said, it breaks up the two songs from McCartney. And just in general, the drums and the Hammond organ on this are so kind of iconically, I don't know, there's such a gorgeous sort of sound that they got on those. And it's about as trippy as you get. Very, very, it's definitely got a Piper and the Gates of Dawn kind of vibe to it. I got to wonder if they, Floyd, after, during, since they were in the studio during the same time they were making this, the Beatles were making this, so got to wonder if they were kind of hearing some of this stuff, a little bit. Yeah, I don't know. There's and the thing of it is too is that the stereo version is not really stereo. It's kind of like it's more mono than it is an actual true stereo. In all honesty, and that kind of goes from the mono release of which. So the mono release of Yellow Submarine, which is basically just a fold down. Now this was originally unreleased so it was originally going to be Yellow Submarine EP in 1968. They were mixed to mono and were never released, but have since been released on the mono remasters that happened in 2009. So you at least get to hear what those things were going to be. And in essence, it's not really that different from what ended up being on the stereo LP. It's not really obviously not stereo. No real differences for the most part. I think the one thing that sticks out is the fact that the chaotic sort of instrumental stuff happening on the record is it's definite precursor to things that were going to happen in '68 with Revolution 9. And also has a thread from Tomorrow Never Knows. So it's like, to me, it's like, again, there's a thread there. And for Northern Song to just be sort of summarily dismissed felt very unfair. And I'm sure Harrison felt the same way, to be honest. Because I don't know, it's always been one of my favorite songs. It's just something, and Harrison's gorgeous voice on that, I don't know, there's something about it that's just very charming and weird, and just like it's as psychedelic as it gets. What are you talking about? So now we get to the remix, which is again from the song track, which is an actual stereo now, with all kinds of swirly stuff going on, and it's actually just really glorious and full stereo. It says you can hear the snare hits. Okay. So one of the things again that, and this is not just this song, but in general this record, again, the way that the drums were recorded were so detailed. You can hear the snare hit, and it popped like on the remix of this. You can hear the snare hit on that Ludwig snare. You can hear it rattling in the drum. Like you can hear the hit bouncing and pinging off the inner shell of the thing. They recorded that well. Just gorgeous. I mean, just like, you just don't hear it. I mean, and you're thinking about technology. I mean, yeah, I think all told there were maybe 4 or 5 different mics on that drum kit, whereas now you might have anywhere from 10 to 16, you know, and it's like what they captured was just phenomenal. Um, so I don't know, Jeff Emmerich as an engineer, I think, possibly the one of the best engineers ever. I mean, I don't think that's a real stretch, and I'm sure that's certainly something that most people wouldn't argue with me about in general. But considering how old he was at the time and what he did on this record, is just really mind blowing when you think about it. If he had done nothing else in his life, it still would have been that'd been enough. If I had ever been able to engineer an album that sounded that good, fuck it, I'd retire. Anyway. Um, yeah, I've kind of gone over the fact that it was a big error. I think that it was missing from Sergeant Pepper. I think it fits perfectly, to be honest. So, do the running order yourself. Just create your own running order. Level the volumes out so that it all makes sense. You did the remaster song of the song track. The actual master wave is a little softer than the new remixes. So to make them sound correct, you just need to kind of bring that volume level up a little bit so that it matches. But you're going to do that. You're going to have Getting Better All the Time, then a Northern Song, then into Fixing a Hole. And it works perfectly. I think it just works perfectly in my mind. I don't know. So Fixing a Hole, I've gone through a lot of different things about this song over the years, about like what it is, what McCartney was thinking with lyrically. I've most recently settled on that it's about paranoia or anxiety. Um, Fixing a hole where the rain gets in and stops my mind from wandering where it will go. I mean, to me that's like a perfect sort of like, if you've got a head full of anxiety, in essence a hole in the head, and the rain's getting in to become depressive, it's probably one of the better songs on Pepper, to be honest. Because it's not about the Moon June love stuff. It's about something a little more serious. It's a little more. It's Macca being more introspective than usual, and when he was able to do that every once in a while, he did great work. I mean, look at Yesterday. I mean, that's about as introspective as you get, and it's perennial. I think Fixing a Hole has a similar, not quite as melancholic or nostalgic, but more sort of like, again, more sort of analytical bent to the lyric about like what's going on in his head. Let's see. So this is one of those ones where again there's a bit of the original stereo mix sounds unbalanced. Like all of the main instruments were recorded on one track, and they're all kind of crammed into the left channel there. Again, this is the original '67 mix. So all of those tracks were just sort of like bounced into that area. And then yet the guitar solo is way over here, so you hear that in wicked detail. So this is one of those ones where the original mix of it is sort of it's fine, but it's not the definitive version of it. The mono version works a lot better. Obviously, same thing. Fuller sounding, drier sounding. Again, as in general, the mono sounds. Fade out's a little longer, but just a general better balance of that. The remix, again, one of those revelatory things, man. It's just like being able to really hear the layers that were and the care that was put into it. Which, like, again, I don't, when you hear the stereo, the first stereo version, you don't hear it. In this new remix, you get that there's multiple harpsichords on in there. It's not just one. There's like a couple, kind of creating a layered effect. The drums and the bass somehow seem to make more sense because you can hear the interplay between the two. At one point, there's 2 drum kits overdubbed which again, you're not hearing those things in that original stereo mix. There's also a bead shaker in the percussion arrangement, which just like, where the fuck did that come from? Or if it was there, I just never noticed it before. It's just these little subtle things that are just that have, for me, it's like I mean, to use probably a really badly cliched sort of metaphor of taking someone's Rembrandt and kind of cleaning it up a little bit and finding a little cherub in the corner that was, painted out because the church didn't want to see a naked cherub in the corner. You know what I mean? So they restored the painting and looked there's a little cherub there that was eked out. That's what it feels like to me. All these little details and things that are pulled out of the mix of this that have just been kind of sitting in a tape box for 50 years. So going on to She's Leaving a Home. So the original stereo version is also at the original speed, which would be the slower speed, as the mono went slightly faster speed by almost a whole tone. I think the original mix has always been really good. It's interesting so one of the things that does happen that I'm glad they did on this project is so She's Leaving Home. If you're unaware, there are a few notes edited out of the arrangement just before each verse. Some cello, just a couple of cello kind of filigrees, to make it a little straighter. And what they did is they did a mix of that with those in, which I went back and forth as to whether or not I wanted it to be a part of my alternate mix of it. And I would usually be the person to I want to put that mix in there because it's different. I don't know. For whatever reason, I think that the original, what they did, there's a reason why they edited those out clearly. So I went with that, their point of view on those notes, and left them. Now in the stereo version from '67, you hear evidence of edits between things. The edits are not quite as smooth sounding. And I've always wondered about that. So now in listening again, I can kind of I understand what was going on there. Again, the mono is faster by like a whole tone. It is almost more of a frantic feel to it, and definitely not as much echo as usually like on the harp, especially. But it has more of a frantic feel on the mono, which. I don't know if it enhances it much, really, other than just making it sound a little too fast, to be honest. I think it being the regular slower speed. It's a little more thoughtful. It's a little more sort of, emotional, for that matter. Now, what's interesting is in the remix, they went with the mono speed. So they went with the frantic speed because, again, that was considered, that was their intention. That's what they wanted. Same thing, but there's hardly any echo on the harp. The string section, though, they've been able to really pull it out and make it just rich and beautiful and really, really, just a full meal of strings right there. And you're able to really hear what I have written here is you really hear the dichotomy of the single voice, and then doubled on the choruses. So McCartney's single voice on the verses, and then doubled on the choruses. It's again, it's a very simple song, but again, I think one of the better songs on the record, to be honest. And again, it's a McCartney song, so of course it would be. Just because, again, it's not about the normal thing. It's about a girl running away from home, and the new mix, I think, just really pulls out that emotional sort of element to it. Now, I've got a note here and I think it popped into my head about in general the songs and the Sgt. Pepper record in general. It says the influence of media on many songs on the album. And if you think about it, it's true. I think that, because that was taken from a newspaper article. A Day in the Life is taken from newspaper articles. Good Morning is taken from a cornflake commercial. There seems to be a bit more just use of an outside influence as opposed to an inside influence that like a regular love song would be. You're hearing the context of the songs in general are from the outside in instead of the inside out. I think that's in general what is going on there. I don't know. It was just a thought that popped into my head. You take for that what you will. So going finally into what would be the end of side one, which is Being for the Benefit of Mr. Kite. The original stereo is, as slight a song as it might be, it's as colorful a musical presentation as Northern Song is, as inconsequential. So, again, I'm just reiterating the point that, something like Benefit for the of Mr. Kite, which was, again, it was influenced by a circus poster that was found in an antique shop. So again, outside influence, and there's nothing special about it. It's literally just like recreating the poster in musical form. There's nothing particularly deep about it. There's nothing particularly, I don't know, certainly nothing emotional about it. It's just a depiction of this poster. It's still striking as hell. I mean, just the arrangement of it. And again, they did even just the remastering. In general, that original mix is, about as perfect as you're going to get at the time. The mono version, it says hardly any echo on the voice. So once again, we're kind of, in general, the mono is a much drier affair. And which is interesting because, like, on the stereo version, on the line, in his way, Mr. K will challenge the world, is this big sort of stereo reverb thing that happens on just that line, and in the mono, it doesn't happen at all. So it's kind of it's one of those places where in my head I'm thinking, is the stereo really not the one that they put the most thought into? It seems odd to me that why wouldn't they put that on the mono? Because it seems to be that's a pretty important effect there. I don't know. Yeah. And so in general, yeah, I'm saying here that, because it's drier, it's just not quite as effective as the stereo version. So, especially with the swirling kind of background montage that kind of goes in the middle section and the end section, where in the stereo version, it's like you get you're getting that real swirling effect with the reverbs all over the place, and the mono just kind of doesn't have that. So the mono kind of fails, to be honest, on this song. It fails it a little bit. Onto the remix, you can hear just the layers of the harmoniums, the harmonicas, and the mellotron. You hear every single layer on its own, but in tandem and together as glued together. And the swirling tape montage. I have a note here. It says and I could swear there's a Moog synthesizer in there somewhere. I mean, it's clearly not, because they weren't using that at that time and it wasn't available to them. But you hear there's just tones that they got that I think are a combination of harmonicas, the mellotron, the harmoniums and stuff like that are creating some sort of what sounds like some sort of a bouncy kind of Moog kind of tonality there. Again, I think the remix wins on this one for sure. In general, so far, just so you're aware, if we're counting at this point, the remix has won every single song here. So there, that's my opinion. Again, which is interesting because, again, I think when I was doing the All Things Must Pass one, there were some original mixes that were better than the remixes, etc. So far, in my opinion, the new remixes have been uh, just spot on, like not one miss at all. So flipping over the record, so to speak, I'm going to depart again from the original running order, and this is where I was putting or am putting Strawberry Fields Forever with Penny Lane. So in the second spot. So basically, side two starts off with the single, and then runs into Within You Without You, and you'll see why. Again, this is all just my own mix. Again, I think the two songs. I think adding those two songs to the record balances the sort of non-essential songs on the record with some more essential stuff. So non-essentials being something like "Lovely Rita," "Good Morning, Good Morning." Even "Losing the Sky" for that matter. I mean, as good as all of those things are, they're not better than either of those songs. So I see why George Martin lamented not having them on the record. So to me, they balance the record out even more so, between things that have a little bit more depth to them and emotion. And both Strawberry Fields and Penny Lane, I think, really walk that balance well between emotional curiosity, emotional and analytical curiosity. Again, more influenced by the outside than the inside in some ways. I mean, ironically, though, Strawberry Fields is probably the most inward written song of all time. But it's in response to outside influence in my thinking. So what's interesting here? So I'm going to go back to the original remaster, which would have been on the either the Past Master or the Magical Mystery Tour. They're essentially the same mix. And the remaster really does a good job of just sort of accentuating all of the elements of the piece. Again, it's the floating bass, the sort of each piece of that puzzle are just so well honed and worked on that there wasn't much that needed to be done. I think is what it comes down to, because it was so perfect from the get go. Again, it's another one of those places where the original remix has little bits and pieces of counting, like you hear George Martin counting in just before the second break where the strings come in. And again, it's those little things that I like to hear, and to me, it's almost like a thread of what you're hearing then in a day in the life that gets left in of Mal Evans counting. So that's all on the original stereo mix. The original stereo mix, and again, what I like about that mix is that you are getting that kind of radical stereo imaging going on of something, hard right or hard left, and something pops in there, and it just sort of it's about as perfect a mix as you're going to get. There's not much to say about it. It's perfect. It really is. The mono version of it would have been what most people would have heard on the radio, and it's again, thinking of when that came out in February of '67, hearing that on the radio, and it's sort of like, what is this? Alien sounds. I mean, just not something anybody could have fathomed, really. I have a note here about the sword mandal pulled out instead of fading out. So, and that's at the end of the. So, in the stereo mix, the sword mandal is sort of faded out, whereas in this mono, just sort of. And there's also no counting. You don't hear the George Martin counting. In the remix now, this is a remix from the box set, because they did remix it. Again, Strawberry Fields and Penny Lane were very much a part of this box set, even though they're technically not on the record. You're hearing that clarity that the remixes brought, from the multi-generational tapes. but it's almost sort of too balanced, if that makes any sense. The thing that I like about the original mix of this is that isolated hard left, hard right panning of different elements, vocals, whatever it might be. And the new remix kind of does it, as like Giles has been doing on the rest of the record, has been kind of balancing the stereo mix in a very, again, with equanimity is the word, so you're not hearing something drastically over here or whatever. However, I think this is where a remix doesn't necessarily better the original mix. So there you go. Now, the only thing that is different about this stereo mix that they did in that, when you think about it, I wish they had done with the original mixes that the sword mandal segues between the choruses and the verses. He does a pan between left and right. So that's the only thing that is like nice about it. That's not the only thing, but it's the one nice thing that's a little different. That's sort of like, however, does it win out to the original mix from 1967? Stereo mix? It does not. Stereo mix 67 wins out on this one. Going into Penny Lane, I started listening. I started on the mono. For some reason, I kind of mixed my for some reason, I wanted to listen to this one in mono first. And again, this is what everybody would have heard on the radio in February. Was that mono version. And again, it's as much as it's more mainstream than Strawberry Fields. There's less dissonance. There's still something about it that's very disorienting. I don't know if it's the classical influences or it's just there's something about. I mean, it's another one that's like it's got so many layers on that one that it's like it creates this whole other whole that's just very, very. It's still disorienting in an odd way. The original stereo mix is sort of good enough. Again, nothing to write home about. I think they did a good job. And again, remembering that there was no actual stereo mix in '67, that mix did not happen until a bit later. So it did not happen around the same time of the project. I'm not sure exactly who did that mix, to be honest. I'm not sure if that was George Martin or like who would have engineered it. If it was Jeff Emmerich at that point, the mix. Penny Lane mono would have been what people heard on the radio in February of '67, and there's something about the song in and of itself that's just disorienting about it. There's a, it's more of a story. It's more of like there's a narrative there. There's more of a, there's certainly very obvious nods to local haunts and again outside influence of, their childhood, which again is also echoed in Strawberry Fields. So there's definitely that strong kind of looking back kind of through a haze of, rose-colored glasses, I think is what it is. And what's interesting is that in the Penny Lane video, there is a moment where Paul McCartney hands John Lennon a pair of odd-looking sunglasses. Hence the idea, I think, writ large in the video that, like, yes, we do tend to look at our childhood, in retrospect through rose-colored glasses because a lot of our childhoods were crap. And in looking back, we like to think, or we like to maybe think about our childhoods as being better than they actually really were. And I got to wonder if Penny Lane is kind of what that's about under the surface of just the generalized naming of streets and goings on and things going on in the street and just sort of kind of a day, dare I say a day in the life of Penny Lane. But I wonder if was potentially more what McCartney was kind of trying to get at, that looking backwards is you tend to look with rose-colored glasses if you're trying to find the good that might have happened in a crappy situation, in general, the remix has to be said to be the definitive mix because, again, they're, in being able to go back generationally in the tape archive, and this one especially because there's multiple generations of keyboards and percussion and horns and vocals, and it's very complex. You get a real sense of like just how much craft was put into this record. And what's also interesting is the fact that, like, the way that this was recorded was keyboards first. Ringo overdubbed the drums onto a semi-finished track. There are percussion effects in there that sound like mini cannons firing. That is indeed a sped up drum roll effect, which again you're not able to discern that stuff in its original form because they're not clear enough. This new clear version is just, again, I'm going to say revelatory. There's really no other word for it. So Penny Lane, once again, the remix wins the day. So there's that. So what I did here is from the ending of Penny Lane, which has that sort of kind of slightly almost getting better like droning effect at the very end. I crossfade that with the drone that comes in at the start of Within You Without You, and it works perfectly. Dare I say. I think that again, potentially there was a missed opportunity there. As a bit of a sort of stream of consciousness kind of narrative of the record, So, a lot has been said about Within You Without You. Some people think it's terrible, or some people think it's like the weakest thing on the record. People just, I don't know, some people just dismiss it as like, the kind of the Indian pastiche that everybody, especially George, was going through at the time. There might be some truth to it. However, in general, as a piece of music on its own, I think it's fantastic. It's something. I mean, it's more complex than anything Lennon and McCartney were composing. Put it that way. Now, was some of that due to George Martin? For sure. George Martin's arrangement of the strings, along with the Indian instruments, is pretty breathtaking and original. So, if we're starting with the remaster, and this is something that I've always heard, the orchestra always felt very indistinct. Just, you don't really hear it as an orchestra, or at least in my mind I didn't. A couple of weird little things, same thing on this one, like you hear little bits and things in the background. There's where after the middle instrumental section going into the last verse, you hear George counting that Indian, the Indian kind of along with the tabla at the time. Dum ba dum da dum 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 da do da do. And you hear him counting along with it. I look forward to those kinds of things, obviously. That counting is gone from the remix. Again, Giles took that opportunity to clean it up, and that's fine. There is a point where you hear just before the middle sitar solo section, you hear an edit, like a very clear kind of like cut, like okay, they took two different mixes and they put them together, and we're kind of sloppy about it, I would say. Like I said, I think at the time the stereo was not considered to be that important, so I think that there's a little sloppiness there, which is a shame. I think though that in general the remaster does a really good job of just bringing out what was already there in the remix, which, again, not the remix, let me back up. The remaster, seeing as what happens when you remaster, remix, whatever, the remaster from 2009 does a pretty good job of bringing out all of those textures of the original mix, stereo mix. So into the mono version, the solo section, you kind of hear a lot of added ADT or automatic double tracking, especially toward the end of that middle section, which you don't hear on the stereo section, like really whatsoever. Um, there's I haven't noticed there feels like a yeah, okay, I see what it is. So my note is that on the mono you get more of that sort of call and response than you do with the stereo. So like the sitar plays a note and then the orchestra does a little round, and then the sitar like there's a back and forth and a call and response that's very much a part of what Indian classical music does between the sitar and the tabla. So I think in the mono actually it kind of works better somehow. Um, though toward the end of the mono version, the orchestra seems to just sort of disappear, which is very odd to me. Um, Once again, the remix wins out here. Every instrument, is, and I mean like every instrument in the orchestra, in the Indian section, are so gloriously recorded, and you hear every string, and you hear the bowing. I mean, it's just so big and full now, and you hear George's voice is pulled forward now. Not a lot, but enough to really be able to hear the tonality of his voice and how well it blends with the Indian, the sitar and just George's tone. To be honest, has always been potentially my favorite of all of the Beatles. His is that glue that has always, I don't know. There's just that. It's so reedy, I think is the word. Um, in general, the balance of everything is just so much better. Uh, the I have it here the intro. Sword Mandel goes from left to right, and I like that stuff. Again, it's a stereo thing that like was missed on the original remake, the original mix of the stereo. This little details like that. Um, yeah, and everything is just so. What's interesting in hearing this remix is that you kind of almost hear how difficult it must have been for these very traditionally classical players having to slur those string sounds to kind of emulate an Indian aesthetic, right? Because it's so much clearer now, you can kind of hear the struggle a little bit, which is I find kind of fascinating. And they didn't do too many takes of this either, which is even more interesting. Is the fact that they pretty much nailed it really quickly. So I mean, that's kudos to those classical players. I mean, they can, talk. I mean, that's real technical ability there, because that's just not something that they're used to. Um, the one sour note that I have with any of the remixes on this record. So on the original stereo mix of this, on the sitar solo section, you hear two sitars, like you hear it overdubbed. Harrison is playing the sitar, and he's playing the same part, doubled in essence. Um, and the one thing that's interesting about it is that in that original stereo mix, you really hear the difficult sonorities and tonalities of the sitar, and trying to capture those things with the equipment of the day, trying to tame those tonalities with compression or whatever it might have been was very challenging. But what I like about the original mix is that, especially in that solo section, you hear those notes pop, or they're really just like coming at you every once. Like they're not all kind of level like that. They're very expressive and they're very volatile. And what they did here in this remix is apparently they found either a different take of the original solo, but you've lost the double interplay of the overdubbed version. And in essence, you hear, this is the one place where you can hear that they've compressed the fuck out of it, so that you lose that expressive full range of what a sitar sounds like. And I I'm very much I think using compression. Uh, what's the word? Using compression is obviously a necessary thing when you're recording, especially when you're trying to record something that has like a volatile kind of sound structure like that. However, there has to come a point where you're either using the compression to subtly control something, or you're using it to affect something. And in essence, they crossed that line with that solo in the remix here. In essence, they squashed the life out of that, and that's the one place where there's a misfire. Um, Again, it's one of those things you grow up with a certain tonality of a certain thing and a certain song in your head, and then the remix comes along and kind of redirects it a little bit. It's sort of like, I don't know, you know. That's the one place, and this is on the entire record now. At this point, this is the one place where they kind of drop the ball a little bit. Um, I guess the question would be, does it ruin the rest of the mix for me? Um, it does not. However, I think at that point it wrestles with the original as being the best. I think in general, what the remix does for the rest of the song is worth, a minor little blip like that, I suppose. Um, but it's unfortunate that like that one little thing just kind of makes it, keeps it from just being ever so perfect like some of these other remixes are. Um, I think it still gets the edge just ever so slightly, but not by much. As the better, as the one I would still want to listen to first. Um, yeah, so there's that. And then we're going into When I'm 64, and the original stereo is at the faster speed. So from the mono, which was the original speed, they brought it up on the stereo to be the faster speed. Um, and in general, this particular one has always been sparse and very a lot of space. It's always, one of those ones that always lent itself well to that extreme kind of left right mixing aesthetic of 67, and the um, the fact that like the vocal harmonies are at the right with Paul and reverb. Martin's woodwinds arrangement is very subtle but very effective. Again, it's a sparse arrangement. There's not a lot to it, and it doesn't need a lot, obviously, because of the nature of the song. But what is there is still just very, very clear and decisive. And again, that original stereo aesthetic is very kind of, it works. It's balanced. It's a good mix. The remaster is very well done. The mono, which was actually the original recorded speed, once again a lot less vocal reverb. The vocal harmonies blending with the clarinets really kind of highlight somehow more on the mono than the stereo. How the Beatles' vocals are like pretty much they blend so well with the clarinet arrangement that you get a sense that they're just they blend almost perfectly. So when you think of the Beatles, that 3-part harmony that they have, it's a woodwind section. Like, it's not a sax section, it's not a trumpet section. The reediness of their voices, reediness, obviously. So it gives the essential sonic aesthetic that the Beatles' harmonies are a woodwind section. So just putting that in your head there. That's the thing that kind of stood out to me more in the mono than the stereo. So the remix isn't not much. They was different other than again, a better balance in general. The vocals are more in the center. It actually has a bit of phasing put on it a little bit, which I wonder if that was something that was on the original tracks potentially, because you don't hear it in the original stereo or the mono for that matter. So I don't know if it was some hard to tell whether that was added after the fact or if that's part of the stereo or part of what was recorded. Not really sure there. But in general, it's almost a toss up on this one between the mono and the remix for me. Again, I loved how the mono, you're just hearing that blend of the voices and the clarinets. Again, you hear it better in the remix as well, but for whatever reason, the mono just like it pops. That tonality there just kind of pops a little bit better for me. In general, the bass drum, the bass guitar, and the kick in the center, I mean, it really, those staccato notes that Paul is playing on the bass and Ringo's playing, they're so fucking tight. And I'm going to say that again. Paul and Ringo, their section, and and it's not even a rock song. I mean, this is like music hall. Ringo's playing brushes, and it's just they're so fucking tight. They're so fucking tight. It's like, oh man, and it's like the remix again. It just really accentuates because you can hear the breath around each note, and I think that's one of the things that people miss about a lot of Beatles music is that they were very conscious or maybe subconscious. I don't know what it's hard to say. Somehow their music is very conscious of silence, of rests, of like if you play quarter note, you're just playing a quarter note. You're not letting that quarter note like ooze out over into a half note or like it's very precisely. And I got to wonder if that was Martin's influence there. But like you hear space between a drum fill or just the space between the 1 and the 3. There's just audible rest. You know what I mean? It's not constant sound. It's real music that has notes and rests. Whereas a lot of music sometimes is just fucking notes all over the place and like there's no sound of the rest. There's nothing in between the notes to really differentiate them, And a song like When I'm 64 really accentuates that, like, you hear in between a phrase, you hear absolute silence when you are really listening to it. And it's something that I it's something that I would suggest that other people really look at or listen to when they're listening to the Beatles. Don't just ingest it like the candy we've been eating for 50 years, Really listen to it. Listen to how well they separate their phrasing and just like, it's just, and again, I think a lot of that has to do with Ringo's precision as a drummer. It allowed the rest of the Beatles to perform more expressively and a lot more thoughtfully, instead of it just being kind of a clatter and they just kind of, not did they do songs that were very clattery, like something like Helter Skelter? Of course they did. But when you have something a little more subtle like this, it's just like it's very, very obvious, So next up is Lovely Rita. I in this video I potentially have been slagging Lovely Rita off a little bit as being not so substantial a song. I'm gonna still back that up because it's not. However, it's Lovely Rita. I mean, it's still it's there's a very particular sound about it. But what's interesting is when you think about what's on the record itself is that it's very simple. It's a very simple record. It wouldn't have been that hard to reproduce live on stage. It's bass, drums, a bit of guitar and drum. Bass, drums, guitar, and piano, and voices. That's kind of it. You know what I mean? It's like there's nothing. I mean, it's the way things were treated were a little different, but that could have been very easily reproduced. Really, the original stereo remaster. Again, it's got this sort of that extreme kind of '67 stereo field aesthetic. You can kind of hear that aesthetic works on this song because you can kind of hear the pieces in various areas of the stereo field, which is is always still a fun listen. Feels like the voice, same thing here. The bass and the voices are kind of in league with each other throughout the remaster. What they brought out in the bass, but again, it doesn't overwhelm the vocals, but they're more on par. The remaster is very, very good in general. In the mono version, the acoustic guitar, the only note I have is here is that is almost more prominent in general. the mono. So the mono isn't anything different or special. Same thing, a little drier. Then I don't know. There's nothing to write home about in the mono version, as far as I'm concerned. Now, on to the remix. I have it written here as fucking glorious. Specifically the drums. And just all of the layers are so clear. The piano and the acoustic guitar have their own space now instead of having to share space because they get bounced together. The bass guitar has its own, space. The ending accentuates the acoustic guitar, making a sound that's utterly buried in the original mix. It's like suddenly it's doing stuff on the ending that it's like, what is that sound? And it's like, oh, that's the acoustic guitar. It's like, just stuff like, and then being able to hear actually what Lennon says at the very end. It says, "You'll never believe it, not leave it." It says, "You'll never believe it," is what Lennon says in that last, just as the piano glissando happens. This is another one where the drum sound on this song is, I'm getting tingles thinking about it. It's so gorgeous. The like, put it this way: if someone had the bright idea of putting together some sort of a software engine using nothing but the drum sounds from Sgt. Pepper, like emulating, all the various hits and things that Ringo did, so that you could create, basically as a drum programming, for software, for plugins and stuff. I'd buy that in a fucking heartbeat, dude. I don't care. It's just like would I want Ringo's snare sound on one of my tunes? Yup. Especially the one from Lovely Rita. Just continuing the revelatory theme that the drums on this record are just glorious. They're glorious. There's really nothing more I can say. But once again, the remix wins on that one. Okay, so then we are into Good Morning, Good Morning. And this is another one where the original mix of this sounds very imbalanced to me. The original stereo mix. The brass tones in the right sound, obviously kind of altered to make to sound not unlike horns, really. They're really you can hear them as horns, but they're just it's such an unusual way to record them. One of the things that did come out to me as I was listening, especially on headphones, and this is the remaster, not the remix. I'm wondering, are the horns like because there's a lot of saxes in there? Are the horns clacking the keys in rhythm in between the lines? You know what I mean? Like just it's a rhythmic thing. That's something. It's not an unusual thing, but I never noticed it before. Like, are they in between their horn lines? Are they creating a bit of a percussion effect? Just again one of those things that pops out, and so it gives you an idea that the remasters from 2009 are actually really, really well done. They did bring out a lot of things. Listen, if I had to live the rest of my life listening to those remasters, I'd be more than happy. The mono, not hearing those rhythm effects because, things tend to get swallowed up. However, again, just the idea of listening to the mono version of this on the radio would have still sounded so fucking weird. It's still just, again, the treatment of the song itself, especially the horns. It just would have sounded so strange to me. There seems to be a lot of extra ADT on the mono guitar solo for sure in the middle. You can hear the solo itself is a lot more treated than the stereo version. For good or bad, I'm not really sure. What's interesting here, though, is the segue. The segue with all of the animal effects going into what will end up being the Sgt. Pepper reprise. What's again interesting here is that the mono um, which was considered definitive, the transition that they used was actually really shitty. The the better one is the stereo one. So I don't know. That's another one that has always kind of mystified me. The transition between the chicken clucking and then the guitar in the stereo, the 67 stereo, is perfect. Whereas in the mono, you can hear the tape wobble, and they missed it. They fucked it up. So it's like, I'm not sure. It's weird. Again, just the same idea that like somehow the mono was definitive. It's like, really? Okay, well, whatever. So now the remix sounds huge, and I even put here too huge question mark. Um, it's basically it I don't know, there's a noisiness to it. The accents, it accents the noisiness of the tune. You know, the clattering nature of the horns, and just the sort of the echoed vocals, and it's a it's one of those songs that has less of those rests I was just talking about. Put it that way. Um, you'll pardon me if you hear a cat in the background. He's floating around some stuff. So if he knocks something over in the middle of this, I'm probably not going to edit it out. Anyway, in the remix, the guitar is backed off a bit in the middle for some reason. I'm not really sure why, which I kind of miss. So I don't know. Again, just a couple of minor things. But once again, what they did is they used the stereo effects outro into the reprise, which makes more sense to me. And digitally they were able to do that a lot easier for sure. So, but in general, the minor solo guitar backed off a little bit, doesn't detract enough for this to be, the definitive mix. It is the definitive mix at that point, in my estimation. All right, so we're heading into the home stretch now. We are into the Sgt. Pepper reprise, and so what we're talking about again is the stereo version of it. The transition is still the better version of it. And in general, again, the sound of the original mix of this has always been pretty well glorious in that regard. Though the mono is very different, so there's more ADT on the voice on the mono version. Paul's vocals are almost completely different. But the effects are clumsy, or clumsier, I should say. And then the remix again is just big and full. You can hear everything clearly defined. It says says Vokes uses mono Paul Vokes. So yeah. So in other words, they used whatever take Paul is using on the mono version than the stereo version. So yeah, it's a quick tune. There's not a lot to it. It's actually pretty sparse. So the remix wins out on that one as well. So we are literally on our last go around here, our last song. So Day in the Life. The original mix of this is still a stunning listen. I mean, it's again the remaster that was done very it was done very sensitively. Like, it was very subtle. Like, again, they didn't go overboard in trying to make it sound any more contemporary than it already does, to be honest. Which is ironic, because this whole record shouldn't sound contemporary. It is of its time, for sure. Once again, you're hearing things that are already bounced together. The guitar and the shaker echo, and John's live vocal. You can hear that they're playing live. So the guitar and the shaker are in one ear, John's vocal in another ear, but you're hearing a bit of that bounce back in the room. Here Ringo's drums, of course, are the focal point in general. The the remaster mix in general is pretty perfect. I mean, it's about as perfect as, it's much like Strawberry Fields. I don't have much to say bad about it, to be honest. I mean, and it's already been, compositionally, it's already been pulled apart. I don't need to go into any of that stuff. Even though, like, on a technical level, so when the orchestra comes in, at the time when they were remixing this, there you can hear a couple of different versions of where the orchestra, the tape decks were not fully perfectly in sync. There's a little bit of a slightly out of sync nature, especially of the orchestra coming out of the middle section into the last verse, with the Paul. I am saying it as Paul, and it's not John, doing the part after went into a dream. So that's final horn line, bum 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 bum. It's a little bit out of sync, but I'm like that. It's like it's never been a problem. It's certainly fine with me, and it's certainly fine. It was fine enough to put on a record. Again, here, if we go to the mono version of this, it's the orchestra swells sound almost more bizarre for some reason, and they're actually better synced. The orchestra is better synced than the original stereo version. Again, I can't help but think, it's like, what did this sound like on the radio back in 1967? Just unheard of. I mean, just like what it's like, where is this coming from? It's hard, and again, 50 years of listening to this music, it's hard to divorce yourself from 50 years of that experience. But you have to try. I think that's the bigger thing, especially those of us that are younger, or especially younger people. Man, I can only imagine, like, younger folks really like the first time, someone who's like 15 years old and has never heard A Day in the Life before, and is willing and open to hear it. It's like, just the thought of being able to have that experience again. To be honest, it's one of those things where it's sort of like, if I ever ended up with dementia and my memory was gone, and all I had was this music, and it would be like I'd never heard it before. Wow, how cool would that be, right? Talk about, like, ironic gifts. I don't know. So in the remix, what they did with the Day in the Life is, now Lennon's vocal is front and center instead of off to the left, and of course the orchestra is now perfectly in sync through the whole thing. And I do put in here, it says maybe too perfect. Again, I don't know if that's just through the haze of my own experience with this thing. The vocal, the centered vocal is a little bit more on par with the mono, but what I miss is the vocals moving from right to left in the first verse, when the orchestra swell first starts. This is so the original stereo is when this happens. So, the first time he says, "I'd love to turn you on," the voice is here on the left. "I'd love to turn you on," and as the orchestra starts to mimic the kind of like the alternating notes there, his voice pans across the stereo field to the right, and the orchestra follows him. Right. So in the original stereo, that's, to me, just so moving. I mean, literally and configuratively. And in the remix, they don't do it, because his voice is set front and center. So again, I think this is one of those this might be the one where, as beautiful as the remix sounds, I don't know if it edges out the original. I really don't. I think that, the fact that the orchestra is a little too perfectly in sync. Again, the balance is great, and it's, but there's something about the original mix of A Day in the Life, all the way up until that squeaky chair with the pianos, and the piano chord in the remix. I mean, you really hear the spread of the pianos. You can really hear each piano. It's beautiful. I mean, it really is gorgeous. However, Ironically, the denouement and the final epic song of the record, I think the original mix wins out on this one, to be honest. So, you know, so that's Sergeant, and well, you know, but then of course there's also the little whatever hurts tone for the dogs and the little snippet of, you know, inner groove stuff. That's always, and that's there as well, and I like the fact that they put that there. So, so in general, I think it's pretty clear that the remix in general wins out. Are there a few bits of it that I think aren't fully up to snuff or whatever? Of course, you know. So there's not much more to say about it, to be honest. I think at that point, I've said all I need to say, other than the fact that, you know, Giles went on to do a remix also of the White Album, and then Abbey Road, and most recently the Let It Be albums. I've had other folks saying, "Oh yeah, you need to do the same thing with all of these records." So, you know, in time, I probably will. I'm not sure about Let It Be, to be honest, because it's never been the most favorite of mine in the catalog. However, I do have a much better sense of it, especially after watching the Get Back documentary from Peter Jackson. I have a better appreciation for the non-specterized version. So, you know, there's not really much to analyze on that one, to be honest. So, there would definitely be more to analyze on the White Album and Abbey Road, for sure. That's going to take some time, obviously, but again, we are hoping that potentially there will be a Rubber Soul / Revolver remix project, as there's rumors to be. We'll see. Otherwise, I hope you've enjoyed this. Please let me know in the comments. Again, just, you know, be nice. These are all my own opinions. It is what it is. You don't have to agree. We don't have to agree. You know, we can certainly agree to disagree about this, that, or the other. This is just some fun shit to do on a sunny Sunday, on a long weekend, and but I have wanted to do this for a while, so because it's things I've been thinking about. So, anyway, I will see you later. Hopefully, the next one I do will be the White Album. So I'll let you know when that's going to happen. Ta-ta.